All right, today we're going to unpack the official findings from a series of really critical reports from the UN and major human rights groups that all came out between late 2024 and late 2025. Our goal here is to deconstruct what these sources are actually confirming about the scale of the crisis in Gaza and what its long-term impact looks like. We're going to break this down into 5 key areas, and you'll see how they all connect. We'll start with the officially declared famine, then move to the mass displacement of the population, the really serious legal allegations of genocide, the systematic destruction of society's foundations, and finally, we'll look at the lasting aftermath of it all. So let's dive right in with the most immediate humanitarian crisis. The reports we're looking at leave no room for doubt. They confirm an officially declared famine, something described as basically unprecedented in the modern history of the Middle East. Now, to really understand the weight of that, you have to know what the official term means. When you hear IPC Phase 5, that's not just a fancy way of saying people are hungry. No, it is the most extreme, the most severe technical classification there is. It signals a complete catastrophe defined by mass starvation and, tragically, widespread death. And we're not talking about a small pocket of people here. The World Health Organization reported that as of September 2025, that catastrophic Phase 5 classification applied to 640,000 people. And on top of that, you had over 1 million more in the phase right before it, the emergency phase. The scale is just staggering. But here's what's absolutely crucial. The UN reports don't just focus on the tragic outcome. They investigate the alleged intent behind it. A UN special committee concluded in its findings that, and I'm quoting here, starvation was reportedly being used as a weapon of war. They pointed to what they described as a series of deliberate policies. Of course, a food crisis like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's completely intertwined with the next major finding from the reports, the mass, forcible displacement of nearly every single person in Gaza. The numbers are honestly hard to wrap your head around. By October of 2024, the estimate was that 1.9 million people had been uprooted from your homes. That's 90% of the entire population. And many of them weren't just forced to move once, but multiple times. And according to rights groups, we should be very clear, this was not a voluntary evacuation. A late 2024 analysis from Human Rights Watch concluded that these actions met the legal definition of forcible transfer, which, under international law, is a war crime. Now, the reports all emphasize a piece of history that is absolutely vital to understanding the depth of this. This event is often called the Second Nakba. Why? Because about 80% of Gaza's population were already refugees, or the descendants of refugees from the 1948 war. So for them, this isn't just a single event. It's experienced as this layered generational trauma being repeated. And that deep sense of historical trauma brings us to what is almost certainly the gravest legal finding to come out of any of these reports, the allegation of genocide. And let's be crystal clear, this wasn't an ambiguous or hesitant claim. In its September 2025 report, the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry came to a direct, unambiguous conclusion that Israel had committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The commission was extremely specific in how it reached this conclusion. It identified 4 of the 5 acts that are defined as genocide under the 1948 Genocide Convention. These were 1. Killing members of the group. 2. Causing serious bodily or mental harm. 3. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. And 4. Imposing measures intended to prevent births. So you might be wondering, okay, but what about the big case at the International Court of Justice? Well, the commission addressed that head-on. It pointed out that the ICJ had ordered several provisional measures, like telling Israel to halt its offensive in Rafah. The commission's finding, however, was that those orders were, in their exact words, flagrantly disregarded. This reported disregard for international law leads us directly to the physical reality on the ground, what the UN reports describe as nothing less than the systematic destruction of infrastructure and the total collapse of civil society itself. Now, UN experts and rights groups didn't see this destruction as just accidental or collateral damage. They actually coined specific terms to describe what they saw as a clear pattern. The first one is medicide, which they define as the systematic and intentional destruction of a population's healthcare system. And if you want to know what that looks like in practice, just look at the numbers.
The World Health Organization reported that by May of 2025, an unbelievable 94% of Gaza's hospitals had been damaged or just completely destroyed.
And they saw an almost identical pattern in the world of education. They gave it a similar name: scholasticide, the systematic destruction of a population's schools, universities, and its very access to learning. The result was absolutely devastating, with nearly 90% of all school buildings in Gaza damaged or destroyed. The reports confirmed that 100% of the territory's children were out of school. An entire generation's education just gone. So, what's the total economic cost of all this physical destruction? Well, a joint report from the UN and the World Bank tried to put a number on it. The price tag for just the direct damage came to $18.5 billion. But that $18.5 billion figure, as huge as it is, needs context. Here it is. That number is equivalent to 97% of the entire combined economic output of both the West Bank and Gaza from 2022. So what the reports are really showing is that the economic foundation of this society was, for all intents and purposes, completely wiped out. So when you pull all these threads together, the famine, the displacement, the legal findings of genocide, the systemic destruction, you finally arrive at the last major focus of these reports: the lasting aftermath and the deep generational scars that will remain. Because the reports make it so clear that the real consequences go far, far beyond the rubble. They talk about the immense psychological trauma inflicted on an entire population. They detail the long-term environmental damage from munitions and destroyed buildings, and they describe an overall generational crisis that is going to complicate any chance of recovery for decades. And this really brings us to the final sobering question that hangs over all of these findings. When the very pillars that hold a society up, its healthcare, its education system, its entire economy, are reported to have been systematically dismantled, where on earth does recovery even begin?